Hi everyone. So thank you for inviting me here. I would like to show my appreciation to Young and our university for giving me this chance. Okay, good morning everyone. I'm Boyi Chen from Xiamen University, and today my talk would be an analysis of single document or combined document from Sěmarang and Cěrbon. Before I start, let me give a brief introduction of my talk today. Okay, my talk today is people in motion. So I try to show that it's in three senses: the spectrum of expansion, transformation, receding, and regeneration. The talk today is majorly focused on Chinese Muslim in Java in 16th and 17th century, even earlier, but our documents may not support this. Tales, histories, or legend. Before I start, I should say that I really appreciate the graph and Piku and later Merkel for collect and annotated these very important sources from those Bahasa documents. It's already half a century and 3 decades, over 3 decades, 4 decades. And I think we should move forward to see which sections could be more reliable or which sections we could use, but not stop at discussion of if it's reliable or not. So my major promotion of these documents that we need to dig out some very reliable sources. We also need to make some full reflection how historical writing legends fabricated or forged in a certain way by women when. I'm not move forward to that step so deep, but at least I do some analysis digging out. I would be very happy to share with some colleagues to see from the perspective of scholarship training what I can see from these sources. So today I would like to develop my talk in 3 sections. One about introduction sources, then we shift to the text analysis section, and I will give a brief summary. Okay, so this is the sources as we have already seen in 1984. And as I have said, it's already nearly 4 decades. Recently, I mean, in 5 years, Alexander Wen and Teren also had some new discoveries, and these 2 papers is very useful to help us to reflect on these sources further. But why these sources important? Since the graph and Piku has very good translation and annotation, and it relates to both the early Chinese activities in Southeast Asia and the process of Islamization in the archipelago. It's in this sense that this document raise the questions and debates to a broader field of scholars, not just the Southeast Asianists. It's an important historical materials. If it's for fabricated or forged, it's also from some places. I have said we need to dig out those multiple sources. And as we all know, historical research earlier in the archipelago is vague in certain senses. We have some archaeological sources. We have some classical Chinese records. We can find some Japanese historical records. We have some oral traditions. Of course, later we have secular Malay, and we also have some old inscriptions, including those old charm, some other inscriptions. All in all, we still lack some very good broader sources to get involved to the history of Japan. I'm not saying that this is not good enough, but it's just sources. We are historian, and we if we have more sources, why not we use it? We search more and more sources if they were really. The background of this source actually come from a very famous voyage, German's voyage, and as we may all know, it lasts for a long time. Tens of thousands of people involved to this navigation and communication quite early in the 15th century. Sailed to far to the Persian Gulf from China and then to East Africa coast and those Swahili spoken areas. And it's also reached Somalia and also Mozambique. It has a long way. Should be more than 3 times the circumstance of the over 70,000 nautical miles. It lasts for nearly 30 years. And there's extensive products and political exchange in more than 30 countries. So all in all, I just want to say that it's not always the maritime sailings, they're always on their way. Fleet need to stop, especially that they need fresh water to get the daily utilities. So they go ashore or use small boats to get these supplies. They need to stop at those very crucial ports. But this activity or this action relate to our story that those ports in Sumatra and Java highly raised developed in certain way, or at least they communicate and connect with each other. They flourish in 15th century. So it's this maritime navigation is not only the navigation itself, it contains a broad history of social economic development and the evolution of local communities in the archipelagos. The ancient medieval history of Indonesia, or we say Nusantara, in more strict sense, also was fascinated. As we have said, in addition to Chinese, Persian, Arabic, and Dutch materials, the current Javanese and Malay documents are really limited, and we would be very happy to see more local or traditional sources that could be digged out. And these chronicles, this Malay Annals, is very good combative sources that we can use it to analyze names of people, places, states, and events. Despite its characteristics, we still can dig out some useful information that we may need. So we would be very happy to use it to supplement, enhance, clarify, and improve understanding some basic historical facts. It's the archives. Originally, it should be collected in the Chinese temples in Samaran and Talan. They say if they were really in that way. But when just argued, Portman cannot get the success in that way, since it's just the timing is not right. It's, we may talk it later. So we save it, this section here. If it's not the archives collecting these temples, it at least come from some very old oral traditions in the local Chinese communities in some, also later in some. It's the connection of social-economic status of the archipelago in the 15th and 16th century, or we can use it to see how the later editors, modern editors, view and imagine they in their own way should be imagined. So my table. Okay, so it's also the issues related to the islands, local Islamizations, early Chinese life in Southeast Asia, localization, and we can also see some Chinese Muslims transform from the Hanafi School to the Shafi'i School. Shafi'i School. This is what I say, people in motion. The second section, they transform from one school to another, one sect to another. As we can see here, the archipelago today in the East Africa, the Swahili spoken region, is mostly the Shafi'i school, and the Hanafi school resists back to some northeast India, Pakistan, and the broad Central Asia. So how come if it's 15th century, the picture that we can map may be very different? So we will see that from the sources, it did happen something, then the community just changed in their own way. The document is claimed by this Indonesian scholar Palindungan. He said that in 1928, the resident portman, Dutch colonial official, was asked to investigate the first king's family. So this guy somehow called Laden Pada, and in our sources called Jimbun, and some historians suspect it's Sepako. They said it's a Chinese. So at the time, it's the KPI uprising, right? But it's actually the routes is in 26 to 27. So Palindungan claimed that Portman claimed that this gap he got this sources in 1928. Maybe dubious. So it's very strong point that Alexander might argue that these sources may be fabricated in their own way. So fabricated by Portman. We don't know. And let's see step by step. Portman took this opportunity and he said he searched the Sampakon temple and Sampakon's Zhenhe's title. And he was honored Sampakon. So he searched and got his sources, led by the Chinese Muslims. Then he had a secret report. So our sources is just preface of this old secret report. According to Palindungan, it's highly confidential, so it's only have 5 copies, and we can't see these copies now. Palindungan also claimed that he's fortunate to obtain the materials copies. He scribed this preface. So in 1964, he published one Facebook called the Tuan Gulao, and he set this section, preface, of our document to his appendix in 31. So this book is majorly history and the spread of Islam in Indonesia, majorly in Sumatra. So actually, this appendix is about the Chinese Muslim in Java. So it's nothing related to, not related too much to his book. We just use it, put it in the appendix, and the name is called the role of Chinese Hanafi Muslims in the spread of Islam in Java. This Pelanan Orang Tionghoa is backed by the Soeharto government, who took power 65. So things become a little tricky. If you did not ban it, maybe not that crucial. But once you ban it, somebody is curious what it was written, and then it's Pantungan student Salman Muyana in 68 then published his book, and he used these sources and he make it a very reliable one, broadly adopted, confirmed it. He also used a chronology to prove how these things and people fit to each other. The book's called The Fall of Java's Hindu Kingdom and the Rise of the Nusantara's Islamic States. The book's also dead in 1971, since it's identifying, citing, confirming the sources. Okay, let's shift. The Graf and Bigo, two experts of Javanese and Indonesian historians, they actually, when they finished their books, the first Muslim principles in Java in 1974, they actually did not use this one, since at that time they stood out the synthesis of this material. But they then partially changed it, and they finished this annotation. When they pass away, then it's Redcliffe who finally collect and publish it at Monash. Let's see some promotions recently. So as I've said, Wang just highly denied the authenticity, and he thinks that chronic Tionghoa, so the section of the Annals of Sěmarang, appear to be the adaptation of Baba Tanah Jawi, and then the Cěrbon section is probably a hybridization and Hikayat Hasanuddin and Huaka Galubang Nagali. So it's possible. I have to say that Wang's arguments are strong, and actually he dig out some very good sources and prove that Portman's really a real person, and he also traced his steps until 1925. And before that, it's quite match what Panindungan said. And that after that, it's problematic. That's when also emphasis knowing that Portman's a real guy, or it's the guy that Panindungan mentioned. It's one thing, but identifying how these other two chronics Tionghoa or Annals real is another. So if Wang's conclusion is correct, Chen Ling and Ko Chunhua's recent article said that according to the sources, the core had field work in Cěrbon. It may not, since core study in Cěrbon found that there was some other Javanese or Cěrbon traditional writing, and like Nagala Kuritabuni. So this Kuritabuni is actually very reliable, and it can fit with some sections of the Annals of the Cěrbon section. And he also highly pointed out that the Sěmarang sections actually it's not that easy to fabric, since it's not fit to the Baba Tanah Jawi tradition that it mentioned Zhenghe too much, at least over 1/3 of the content mentioned Zhenghe. But if it's the Baba one, and earlier other Japanese traditional writing, they mention much less. So still seems that it's the tradition or some oral tradition records that broadly prevail in the Chinese local community, and somebody just collect them and use it in a very different ways, not just purely a fabrication of the well-educated Dutch author in the early 20th century. Let's take a look at the analysis. As we can see, we don't have time to go through the whole documents, so I just pick up the previous 10 sections, majorly about the section in Sěmarang. Since the section in Cěrbon as core has already proved, then the local historical writing tradition quite different, but in some way it can match or not just the resemblance to the Cěrbon section. So let's see. Common one is the first section from 68 to 25. As the graph and Pico has already shown, it's just like something that the later editor have already added for the introduction section, so we can just omit it. And but the other section seems we have some very authentic information from the author living in the 18th century. According to some terms that I found, they were really too modern, like Bindam Maritim. Then the maritime matters of field, too modern. And Nanyang, of course, Asia Tenggara. And it's like in the Ming and Qing section, that in the Chinese terms, Nanyang's very late one. Although we can see it in the mid-Ming, like the mid-16th century, it's still broadly used or specifically target to this region in the modern sense that it's much later in the 19th century. Yeah, in the 19th century. So it's like after 19th century. And if it's like ASEAN Tenggara, then we have already known that it's after 1839 that the US preachers Howard Malcolm developed this Southeast Asian conception, and Southeast Asian conception was much popular even after 1940s when the Allies had the SEAC department. So let's just skip the first section, common one, since it looks like purely modern fabrication. Common two, the existence of Chinese mosques. In some sense, it can neither be verified nor disputed. We still see some Chinese names there, like Chenzhui is like modern spelling, partially from the Giles, Welsh Giles Wales. Peking, Nanking, it's Nanjing and Beijing. It's the southern capital. We see it. It's a mistake that Chenzhui is not executed, not sent back by Chen and executed in Beijing. It's in Nanjing. So the editor apparently is wrong here, but if it's proof it's a fabrication, or if it's proof on the contrary that it's a good source, it's a very good oral tradition that in Java people talk about these stories, saying that this guy's sending back to these pirates executed in China, in Chinese capital, then it's possible. We still don't blame it too much. It might be reliable that it says it's Chen's executed in Beijing. So we see Anzhou here. It's not far from the Jakarta downtown. Right now, it's in northeast sections, very big for the old one. We have very sacred temple there. I visited that temple a couple years ago. And entrance one's very reliable since it connects with Zhenghe's very powerful Horlicks, and it's the one called Wu Bing, and in the text it's called Kong Wu Ping or Kong Wai Ping, but actually it's Wu Bing, and he married a Sanda princess there, living with his father-in-law, and they were second and together. So second tone. We see Jiao Tong there. Jiao Tong is Jaratan. It may not be a very modern making, but since this one's geographical knowledge mostly from the came from the Dutch, and this Chinese name still very it's not quite common in or famous familiar to the Chinese background writer or reader. So it is possible that this place at the times quite prosperous, not far away from Slovakia. It's Gresik. Gresik's much more famous. So this term, Jiaotong or Jatan, could be the one that prevailed earlier. We can see from this sense that it may just not bad faith, but it still looks not that reliable. Okay, comment 3. It covered the time from 1413 to 1449. It mentions Shafi'ah, repeatedly mentioned, seems to have its heyday. It's also built for the use of Damak ruler. The connection with continental China was broken at the time, so we see some vague here in the memory of the great admiral. That's Zhenghe. This section we see numerous Chinese names. They were not mentioned in any Chinese text. So the graph and Pigu also found that it's not in Grunewald's notes. That means that it's not easy to fabricate in some way. So we highly suspect that those Chinese names must either belong to the historical tradition of the Chinese community in Syemarang and Teren, or to be the fancy. It seems that it's could be the previous one. It mentioned Jamba, so it's present day in southern Vietnam. The town still has a broad connection with the Malay water. It's part of the Malay Polynesian system. So it's mentioned that Long Sui Ho, this is a very important guy, the so-called Ladan Lamat, and his name here is also. The story seems very possible since it's let's mention there's less records about Majapahit with the main dynasty following the Chinese sources. And here we match this section, and it's not said that it's the Sultan is not that important place at this time, but since the main court shift its attention at that period for some other reasons, they face the northern Mongol threat at the time. They face the domestic politics at that time. Many other reasons. So it seems that this section is okay. But one guy Haji Mahufu was raised. It said that his Putri wife's Putri Jamba, Jamba's princess, and said that he's the son of the warlord in Yunnan. Seems that it's a little weird. Since Mahufu, we can't find this guy in Chinese. And, he might be an important guy, but it may not be that great as the documents of those local Muslims thought. Islam in Yunnan, we have very clear section lineage that from Said Samsuddin Umar to Nasruddin. Then they developed Muslim, developed Islam and converted many people since the Yuan dynasty, and it's the Ming dynasty that we can have some Muslim cliques, groups, very strong mandate, but it's hard to say that we don't have people called Mahufu, or that we don't get his father's name. So it's dubious. We got Haji Fei and Haji Mahuan's name here. The spelling seems okay, but still a little modern. If it's older, like Putonghua found in the documents in several Tapumi. So we still found that it's rewritten, and then re-edited in a later period. But the name's right. And we mentioned Haji Sampapo and Chen or Haji Bontaken in Jampa, and it's here's the notes that Palindungam had compared to those Japanese occupation in World War II. We may ignore this section, ignore the note that Palindungam had. We from the main text, we know that Tuban's already Java's main port, and we see Majapahit as the kingdom as hinterland, so that's very important. Another very important clues that we see Haji Gan and Zhu. According to Jeff Wade, he thinks that before 1960, since the time Ming Shilu, the veritable records of Ming is not published yet. So this guy's name only in the veritable records. So Palindungam, neither Palindungam or Portman can get this guy's name if he just fabric from other sources. But Wen said that actually Portman could be, since he's returned to Dutch for a while in Leiden or some other places. He has a great library, and this guy's name's not just in the Ming vertebral records, it's also in the history of Ming. So documents that summarize from the vertebral records. So Portman could read Chinese and he could get this guy's name. So anyway, the documents mentioned that he was given the title Aluya. We can't find this one. I don't know what is. Still, dub it. Okay. So we see the decline of Hanafi Muslim community, definitely. So the present sample worship at variance. But some people just argue that why the document did not mention the very sacred place, Gadun Batu cave. This place that said that Zheng prayed there. Stop there for me. One possible explanation is the graph and Bigu has already reached that this divergence between the present non-Islamic worship of Sampo in Samaran and the Malay Annals declines Islamic religiosity, and then things change. So the emphasis section is different. When seen in a very different way. So still, I think the graph and people's explanations are more powerful, and this could be. This section is more reliable. Okay, common 4 from 25 to 31. We see Tumaba. It's the Tamapel and East Java. So we're seeing how different sections integrated. And we see Hajikan Ju again. He's mentioned as the first region in the Majapahit Kingdom who profess Islam openly. This story is not in accordance with the continental Chinese records of life in general. The sources have some false records. So his term ended in 1430, but he did not die in 31. Actually, he started his last expansion in 1431, and he commanded his several naval expedition from 31, 32 to 3. That's the records of the graph and people. So I need to revise it. It's 31, and then probably he died not long after. So I think we should confirm further that it's died in 33 in Calicut. Comment 5. 36. The source mentioned that the Chinese Emperor Yang Yu, but actually at the time it's Zheng Tong Emperor or Zhu Qizhen's period. So we previously historians don't know where Yang Yu, the so-called Yang Yu, come from. I suspect that it could be possible 3 youngsters, these 3 guys, the prime ministers, the factual prime ministers. Since after the early Ming, there were no prime ministers actually, but they are the people in the cabinet who really control the power. And the second one, Yang Rong could be a way that people shift the pronunciation to Yang Yu. So this guy's the real one. If you come at the embassy to visit China, then he might be the highest one that you can meet. So we can't deny it from this very simple sense. But on the contrary, some section like this may enhance the authenticity of the sources. We see Duban that was mentioned, and he said was emancipated, including Sampas, that become a Chinese crown colony and under the immediate authority of Governor of Nanking. Actually, we never heard of this, so it's like fancy here. But one thing that it mentioned Kuchi, that's Cochin China, in middle and southern Vietnam. I think this section is quite good since it's earlier than the Koshi writings. Koshi is one that Japanese call it to this region, and then in 16th and 15th century, then Boyi visited there, and then he adopted this pronunciation. Then later the Western records changed to Cochin China. It's from Koshi. Kuchi could be earlier, and it's a good one. Kingdom of Jamba was finally vanquished by the Vietnamese. Then Bigu thinks this history is recorded in Malay legendary history. I think, yeah, it could be. Okay, comment 6 from 43 to 51. We saw very important Shuang Yong here. It's possibly the double dragon in Hokkien Teochew system. People all think it's a fake guy, since they can't find any Chinese fitted. I think Shuang Yong's very common name to mention those the head of black society and those guns, the leader of the guns. So it could be from Hokkien due to pronunciation. It's said that Sun Leong's Aliadama, this is still doubtful, but if it's matched to his son, then Bong Soon-ho, then definitely not his son, his partner. Then yeah, he could be. And Yang Wei's successor could be Prabhu Wisisa. Then I think this is more reliable. Bong Soon-ho's Laden Lamat, then it's more reliable than the previous two. The graph since it's Paridungan's fences, that Suan Leong's serve as an artillery officer. I think, yeah, it could be, but Suan Leong's this guy might be true, since he's still the very important guy that connect with Bong Soon-ho and later different. As the text mentioned here, half-blood Chinese, if the father's not Chinese, they only have two syllables in the names. Then Suan Leong's father that seem not be Chinese, but I think it might be just his nickname. Double dragon. He has another. And those people with a Chinese father have three syllables in names. Then Bong Soon-ho's the guy with a Chinese father. The graph and Pico says the 20th century editor would be hardly to fabricate all these Chinese names. So it's very difficult to accept the explanation. And it's all fabrication. It is. It's like that. So many names, and we can't verify them one by one, but we can still verify part of them. Speculate in another section. So still, as we have said, this is a very typical Japanese or Malay reading tradition with some fancies and other stories. So we just need to dig out those reliable sources and see what we can do next. It's not just that we fully accept all these documents or we fully deny them. It's very interesting that we see Thomas Billes. Thomas Billes has very good records in his book that shows how the Japanese and Chinese connect with each other at that period. So it also greatly matched what the documents are recorded. Okay, comment 7. We see Regent Gang 1 murdered, and then Tumaban's campaigns freed itself from Majapahit sovereignty. And in the following 50 years, many Hanafi Muslim Chinese were killed. And then this local Hindu Javanese religions. So we see the shift back, the act of this motion, people in motion. We see it's not just a single line or a linear development of the Muslim society in Japan. Comment A. As a consequence of the decline of Ming Dynasty, then we see the Chinese community and Hanafi community degenerated. A very great number of mosques were changed into some Koan temples. That's very reliable and very common. After the first never visit, it's shipped back. And Bong Soon-ho did a very crucial thing that he switched over to the Japanese language teaching and reinforced his power. Establish a Javanese Muslim community. The result was decisive to the history of Java, history of Islam in Java. In Jiaotong, Jeratan, the Hanafi Chinese mosques changed from previous Hanafi mosque to Sampokon Temple after the departure of Bonsuho. Xuan Yong brought two boys. So Jinbun always doubted it can be hardly matched to the strong man in Chinese character. So and King Sun, of course, Golden Mountain. So according to Jones, also Wang argued that since these three guys, two of their pronunciation match to Hokkien, and one we can't find match to any Chinese dialect or Mandarin. So it's from a very different tradition. That means that the documents overlapped. It's combined from different sections. The sources is different. The narrative about Bong Sui Ho is quite accurate. So this section we don't suspect it too much, but like Wang or some others will sing it from the Javanese tradition. Chinese Muslims do not play a great part in the story and development. The Islamic kingdom of Denmark is almost completely in accordance with the Javanese historical tradition. That's what they or what the sources could see. And the explanations of the names is still dubious. So in this section, I partially applaud Wang. I think it's also a combination of these three guys from two sources. The sources said that Jinbun is a very strict believer in Islam and had a very specific description about him and how he attributed to Islam, how eager he to do that. It's like more legend and fancies and stories. This is somehow quite vivid. It's not like an archival writing. But it could belong to the oral traditions. It's very vivid. It's the Jinbun's very crucial sections that he may control the shipping along Java's north coast, and he also received the task from also to establish a Javanese Muslim community to take place the older Hanafi Muslim community. That's why we see the Hanafi school shift to Shafi'i School. Jinbun's brother, King Sun, the Golden Mountain, is ordered by a fifth colonist. So this is definitely Dungan's fancies, since this term, these words did not exist early before the 20th century. So we see these sections added later. Okay, last section. Jinbun ruled the new emerging Muslim kingdom Denmark for 40 years. And he did not kill those renegade guys. And he used their skills to develop his ship building field. So they're very reliable, so it's possible, more possible here, but the descriptions quite weird, but the sources may be more positive. Muslim Denmark forces commanded by Jinbun in person completely destroy Muslim settlement. So it's in Jandi we see another small community there, and Jinbun might destroy it. Okay, brief summary. We see it. The sources contains many monosyllabic characters such as Arya, Tumapan, Kunabumi. That means that it could be the earliest version of this original text may be written in Chinese, and then it's an oral tradition. It's not fully written until 17th or even 18th century. It looks like it's written very, very late, but the oral history of literature prevailed in the local Chinese community for years or for centuries. We suspect that early Chinese sources, Chinese Malays, Babas, those Peranakan documents, and this language is the lingua franca of market plaza that contains with many Hokkien words, and it was used to create and recreate those Chinese literary works, especially the classical one. The original sources that Portman saw most likely written in Malay, if he's really saw those documents. The content complied noted by Portman Alindungan should have been added and deleted many things. We can see many cases there, the Baghdad wedding, the description of Japanese occupation, etc. There are mistakes that the Babas and Peranakans should never make. Like Bo, Sambo Kong Bo, it's top, and it should be Bio, that's temple. So it should be Sampo Kong Bio, it's the temple of Zhenghe. Laksama Des, Zhenghe actually Des in Hokkien, Zheng's in Hokkien. So Laksama Des should be Zhenghe, that's Admiral Chen. But in documented source is another person. So this is a mistake that the Babas would not make. But the annals in any way reflects some religious history and socio-economic history, especially on the spread of Islam in Malay Indonesian areas. We can see some debates, some from insisted from Arabics, Egypt, and another from India, or even Jam people section. But mostly this is based on the location of isolated tombstones and inscriptions. It lacks some more basic for the community development and social life. All the annals provides precisely such kind of religious disseminations that covers over 100 years of history. It's a group of people in scattered communities experiencing continuous promotions and conversion in different periods. So it's mostly like the religious expansions as we really can figure out. We can just have back and forth process. It's not just one time or single dotted places. At the time, Islam's freedom combined with those commercial powers, they fight against the Hindu powers in Java, and the annals actually shows this historical outlook process. And it's supplying some more records or possible message in this that we can dig out, and we see how Chinese promotions of Islam into the local communities along the north coast of Java. And we can also use this to discuss the past and methods of Islamic expansion in Indonesia. The Malay translators implies the Chinese Muslim playing a very leading role, but how comes? In what sense? The two Dutch scholars summarize the influence on non-material cultures and non-material culture, shadow puppetry, gamelan music, and so on, etc. Point out is actually an important one. But all in all, as I should say that it's mostly when we study these sources, the first target we want to reach is that we need to reflect history, legend, tale, fancy, and historical writing for our own selves. It's not that we think we fully accept or fully deny those sources. It's like we need to be most carefully to dig out those useful informations to see in what sense, by whom, when something was mixed or added in different ways, or why, of course. And from the perspective of global history, it's more like methodological section. Study this symbiosis and the interaction between Javanese Muslims and local society, and the significance of this history is global history is our target. And the previous precious vivid records the annals shows. It's also belong to history of overseas Chinese, history of Islamic war, the history of Islam in Southeast Asia. It's also a crucial part of global history, maritime history, and Southeast Asian history, reflecting the richness of mankind fragments of cultural exchange and splendid cultural relics. So I think I've run out of my time in Q&A section. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.